Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a rainy afternoon when Mark Davis, a young law student struggling with the weight of his late father's debts, received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned, confusion washing over him. Who was she? How did she know about his problems? His life, already tangled in mounting bills and sleepless nights, seemed to be closing in on him more each day. Eleanor's voice continued, unwavering and direct, "Meet me at Brooks Bistro, 7:00 p.m. It's important." And before he could protest, the call ended. Mark stood there for a moment, his hand still gripping the phone. The rain outside continued to pour relentlessly, as if echoing the storm inside his mind. Who was Eleanor Brooks? And what did she want with him? With little more than the promise of answers, he made his way to the bistro, hoping for some sort of relief from the weight pressing down on him. At the bistro, he arrived drenched, his jacket barely protecting him from the downpour. Inside, warm lights glowed softly, contrasting with the cold world outside. He spotted Eleanor immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, her silver hair framing a face that exuded power. Her presence was commanding, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Mark couldn't quite place. She gestured for him to sit across from her. "Mark," she said, her voice steady as she took a sip of her tea. "I know about your debts, the ones your father left behind. I know you're barely scraping by. I'm here to offer a solution." Mark blinked, unsure of what was happening. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" he asked, trying to mask the skepticism in his voice. Eleanor set her cup down and looked him straight in the eye. "I know you need money, Mark, and I know you're desperate enough to consider anything. So here's my proposal," she continued, her words coming slow, deliberate. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Mark stared at her, unable to comprehend what she was saying. He let out a disbelieving laugh, unsure whether to be insulted or amused. "You want me to marry you? But why me? You don't even know me." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Exactly," she said coolly. "You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. This isn't about romance, Mark. It's a business arrangement. I'll pay off your debts, ensure your financial security, and in return, you'll be my husband." Mark sat back, stunned. This was madness. But he couldn't deny the temptation. His mother was ill, his sister's tuition was overdue, and his own future was hanging by a thread. The money would solve everything. But marriage? With a woman he barely knew? He couldn't decide if this was a miracle or a curse. "I need time to think about this," he said, standing up abruptly. Eleanor remained calm, unfazed. "Of course," she replied smoothly. "But don't take too long. The offer won't stand forever." As he walked away from the bistro, Mark's mind was a whirl of emotions. The rain had stopped, but his thoughts were still muddled, caught between pride and desperation. He couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's piercing gaze, the cold certainty in her words. She had made her offer, and now it was up to him to decide whether to accept or walk away. The next morning, Mark sat at the kitchen table with his mother, explaining the strange proposal he'd received. She listened carefully, her face etched with worry as he recounted the details. "I know it sounds crazy," Mark said, running his hand through his hair. "But maybe it's the only way out." "It's not a decision you should make lightly, Mark," his mother said softly, her voice trembling. "But if she's offering a way to secure your future, perhaps you should consider it. Mark stared at his hands, torn between the desire to save his family and the nagging feeling that this could be the beginning of something he couldn't control. Later that day, he returned to the bistro. Eleanor was already there, waiting for him, her expression as composed as ever. He sat down across from her, taking a deep breath. "I'll do it," Mark said finally, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Eleanor smiled faintly, her lips curling up just enough to show she was pleased with his decision. This was the start of something neither of them could have predicted. A marriage of convenience, sure. But what neither Eleanor nor Mark could have known was that what started as a deal between strangers would soon turn into something far more complicated. And life was about to change in ways neither of them was ready for. Now, let's return to our main characters and see how this unexpected arrangement unfolds. The decision was made. Mark sat at the kitchen table with his mother, staring at the small crumpled note with Eleanor Brooks' name written on it. His mother had looked at him, eyes full of concern, but there was nothing more she could say. It was the only way out, the only chance for them to survive without falling deeper into the financial abyss. "I'm doing this for you, for us," he had whispered to her before leaving the house. He had to make the sacrifice. He had no other choice. Eleanor's proposal seemed like the only answer. That evening, Mark arrived at Brooks' Bistro again, feeling the same sense of disbelief that had gripped him the day before. The rain had stopped, but his thoughts were still clouded. He wasn't sure what to expect. Eleanor was already seated when he walked in, her posture impeccable, her expression calm but unreadable. The table between them felt like a chasm, one that he wasn't sure could be crossed. "Mark," she greeted him, her voice steady as ever. "I'm glad you came back." He nodded, but the tension in his chest was palpable. "I've made my decision," he said, taking the seat across from her. His hands fidgeted with the edge of the napkin, a nervous habit that he couldn't shake. Eleanor smiled faintly, as if expecting this. "Good," she said. "I'm not asking for love, Mark. This is strictly a business arrangement. We both get what we need." Mark's stomach tightened. He could already feel the weight of the commitment. "What exactly does this entail?" he asked. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You'll marry me," she said simply. "You'll live here with me. You'll be seen at events with me, we'll attend social gatherings, and you will provide the appearance of a happy marriage. You will also be my companion, my partner, and we will keep up this charade until the legal matters are settled." Mark listened carefully, his mind racing. This was not the life he had imagined for himself, but then again, what life was there for him now? His family was struggling, and this was the only way to fix everything. "And you will take care of everything?" he asked, though the question felt almost foolish. Eleanor's eyes softened, just slightly, but it was enough to reassure him. "Everything," she confirmed. "Your debts will be paid off. Your mother's medical bills will be taken care of. I will secure your future, Mark. All you have to do is be my husband in public and play the role." The offer was too tempting to resist. He felt like he was signing away his soul, but what choice did he have? "I understand," Mark replied. "And I agree." Eleanor nodded, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "Good. This contract will work for both of us." She handed him a sleek, black folder. "Here are the terms. Once you sign this, everything will be set in motion." Mark opened the folder slowly, his fingers trembling as he glanced over the carefully written terms. It felt surreal, like he was reading the script for a play he had no interest in acting in, yet somehow, he was already on stage. "One thing," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "What happens if we start to care about each other? What if this becomes more than just a business arrangement?" Eleanor didn't flinch at his question. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not asking for love, Mark. But if it happens, it happens. We will see how it goes. For now, this is just a deal. Nothing more." Mark closed the folder, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing for certain was about to change his life forever. "Let's get started then," he said quietly, standing up and signing the contract. The ink on the paper sealed his fate, and in that moment, Mark knew there was no turning back. As they left the bistro, Eleanor handed him a set of keys. "This is your new home, Mark," she said. "The car is waiting outside. Come, I'll show you the place." Mark followed her in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. The reality of the contract, the marriage, and the life that lay ahead of him was starting to feel all too real. Was he making the right choice? He wasn't sure. But for now, all he could do was follow the path that had been laid out before him. When they arrived at the grand estate, Mark felt like he was stepping into another world. The mansion was elegant, cold, and imposing. This was the life Eleanor had promised him, a life of luxury, wealth, and power. But it came at a price, and that price was his freedom. As they walked through the marble halls, Mark couldn't help but wonder how long he could keep up this facade. How long before the lie would crumble? And if he started to fall for her, what then? Would he be able to walk away, or would he be lost in this world of contracts and expectations? But for now, he had a role to play. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. "Welcome to your new life," Eleanor said, her voice low and steady. Mark didn't know if it was a promise or a warning, but he had no choice but to walk forward into it. Let's see what happens next. Mark woke up the next morning in a room that felt more like a hotel suite than a place he could call home. The massive four-poster bed, the polished wooden floors, and the view of the sprawling garden outside all felt foreign to him. He had never lived like this, never even imagined he would. It was a far cry from the cramped apartment he had shared with his mother, barely able to make ends meet. The weight of the contract he had signed the previous night settled over him like a blanket, suffocating and cold. His mind raced with questions. What had he gotten himself into? Was this really the life he wanted? He had made a deal with the devil, but now that the ink had dried, there was no turning back. He got out of bed, running a hand through his disheveled hair, and walked over to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the estate. In the distance, he could see Eleanor's silhouette as she walked through the garden, her long coat flowing behind her. She was beautiful, poised, and untouchable. Mark had no illusions about her. She wasn't like the women he had known. She was powerful, cold, and determined. But he had seen a different side of her last night, a hint of something vulnerable beneath her ice-cold exterior. Maybe there was more to this arrangement than he realized. He shook his head, trying to push away the thoughts that had been creeping into his mind. It was just a contract, nothing more. He was here for the money, for his family. That was the only thing that mattered. As he made his way downstairs, he found Eleanor in the large dining room, sipping coffee and reading the morning news. She looked up when he entered, her eyes scanning him briefly before returning to her paper. There was a stillness about her, an air of control that Mark couldn't quite place. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth, almost like velvet. "I trust you slept well." Mark nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. He didn't know what to say. They had signed a contract, yes, but it felt like they were still strangers to each other. A marriage without love, a union built on a foundation of convenience and necessity. There was no warmth here, no connection. "We have a meeting today," Eleanor continued, setting the paper down. "We need to discuss our public appearances, the events we'll be attending. You'll be my partner in everything from now on, Mark. It's important that we present a united front." Mark nodded again, his mind elsewhere. The thought of attending social events, pretending to be someone he wasn't, filled him with dread. But it was part of the deal, and he had no choice. As the day wore on, Mark found himself immersed in a whirlwind of preparations. Eleanor's team of assistants took him to a tailor for a fitting, ensuring his wardrobe was suitable for the life he was now living. The clothes were expensive, tailored to perfection, but they felt like a costume. They didn't belong to him. Later, they attended a charity gala together, where they were introduced as a couple. The flashing cameras, the applause was also overwhelming. Eleanor was in her element, smiling and laughing with ease, while Mark felt out of place. He had always been the quiet one, the observer. But now, he was thrust into the spotlight, playing a role he wasn't sure he could pull off. Throughout the evening, Eleanor remained composed, never once letting her guard down. Mark, on the other hand, felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. He was supposed to be her husband, her partner, but they had no connection. The marriage, the contract, all felt like a game he wasn't prepared for. As the night went on, Mark found himself standing by the balcony, looking out over the city lights. He didn't belong here. The world he had entered was full of people who had everything, people who never had to struggle for anything. And then there was him, someone who had worked his entire life just to get by, now living in a mansion, pretending to be someone else. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the act. What would happen if he started to care about Eleanor? What if, in the process of playing this part, he lost himself? Just as he was lost in thought, Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking out at the view. Finally, she spoke. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But we have a deal. You're here for your family, and I'm here because I need you. This is what we agreed upon, Mark." Mark turned to her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of emotion. But there was nothing. Just the same cool, detached expression. "I know," he said quietly, his voice thick with uncertainty. "But it feels like I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't know who I am anymore." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him for a moment before turning away. "You'll find your place," she said, her back turned to him as she walked away. "In time." Mark stood there for a moment longer, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure if she meant it, but somehow, in that moment, he wanted to believe her. He had to believe her. Because if he didn't, he would be lost in this world, this life he had agreed to, forever. But deep down, Mark knew the truth. He was already losing himself. Let's see where this journey takes them. The following days passed in a blur of events, meetings, and public appearances. Mark tried to get used to his new life, but everything felt so surreal. He was living in a mansion, attending galas, and constantly surrounded by people who had no idea that his marriage to Eleanor was nothing more than a contract. But what started as a business arrangement was slowly starting to take a toll on him. Every time he saw Eleanor, something in him stirred, something he couldn't quite name. She wasn't just a business partner to him anymore, but she didn't look at him the way he was beginning to look at her. The weeks went by, and Eleanor and Mark continued to play their roles perfectly. In public, they were the picture of a perfect couple. In private, they were strangers. Mark had learned the rules of their contract well: no crossing boundaries, no questions asked, and no expectations beyond what was necessary. But as time passed, he found himself struggling with the growing connection he felt toward Eleanor. Her cold exterior was slowly starting to crack, and he began to see glimpses of the woman beneath it. It was in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, in the quiet moments when she let her guard down. One evening, they attended a charity event at a luxurious hotel. The lights were bright, the crowd was buzzing with conversation, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Eleanor was the center of attention, as always, a graceful figure surrounded by admirers. Mark stood by her side, his role clear: was her husband, her partner. But as they made their way through the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. They stopped to chat with some influential guests, exchanging pleasantries and smiles, but Mark's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor, about the way she looked at him sometimes, the way her eyes softened when she thought he wasn't looking. He had started to wonder if she was feeling what he was feeling, if maybe this marriage wasn't as fake as they both had originally thought. After a while, Eleanor excused herself, and Mark found himself alone in the lobby. He took a seat by the window, watching the cars drive by, feeling a strange emptiness that he couldn't explain. He had everything he thought he wanted: financial security, a beautiful wife, a life of luxury. But it all felt hollow. Was this really what he wanted? Was this what he had signed up for? As he sat there, lost in thought, Eleanor walked over to him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked different tonight. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. She sat down beside him, her eyes searching his face. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice betraying a hint of emotion he wasn't used to hearing from her. "Are you okay? You've been distant lately." She paused, as if unsure whether to continue. "I know this isn't easy for you, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I'm in this with you." Mark looked at her, surprised by the tenderness in her voice. He had never seen her like this before, never seen this side of her. For the first time since they had started this arrangement, he felt like they were actually connected, like they were both in this together. "Eleanor, I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought this was just about money, just about surviving. But now it feels like something more." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I don't know if I can keep pretending." His heart raced as he spoke, the weight of his words sinking in. He didn't know where this was going, but for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to keep pretending either. Eleanor was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, without warning, she reached out and took his hand in hers. The touch was gentle, but it sent a wave of warmth through him. "I never wanted you to feel trapped, Mark," she said softly. "I never wanted this to be something you had to pretend for. I thought this was just a way to solve our problems, but I see now that it's affecting you more than I realized." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. Was this really happening? Was Eleanor, the woman who had been so cold and calculated, now admitting that she cared? He couldn't believe it, but the way she was looking at him made him think that maybe, just maybe, there was more to their relationship than either of them had been willing to admit. "I never thought I'd say this," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty, "but maybe I'm starting to care about you. Not because of the contract. Not because of the money. But because of who you are." He looked down, afraid to meet her gaze. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel this way." Eleanor didn't speak right away. Instead, she squeezed his hand, a small gesture that made his heart skip a beat. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. And in that moment, Mark realized that everything was changing. What had started as a simple business arrangement was beginning to turn into something neither of them had planned for, something real. But the question remained: could they both handle it? Could they navigate the fine line between the fake marriage they had created and the growing feelings they were both starting to harbor? As they sat there, the world around them continued to buzz, but for Mark and Eleanor, everything had just shifted. And neither of them knew where it would lead. Let's see what happens next. The days that followed were filled with an unexpected sense of tension. Mark and Eleanor continued their routine, attending events, smiling for cameras, and maintaining the illusion of the perfect couple. But behind the facade, something was shifting. Mark found himself thinking more and more about Eleanor, about the way she had looked at him that night on the balcony, and about the quiet moments they shared when no one else was watching. He couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as one-sided as he had originally thought. It had been a week since that conversation, and despite everything, the distance between them had lessened. Eleanor was still as composed as ever, but there were moments when he caught her looking at him differently. Her guard, though still mostly in place, seemed to have cracked just a little. They were no longer just going through the motions of their arranged marriage, they were beginning to share something real, something neither of them had planned on. One evening, as they sat together in the living room of their mansion, Eleanor looked over at Mark, her expression unreadable. She had been quieter than usual, and Mark could sense that something was weighing on her mind. "Mark," she said, her voice low, "I think it's time we talk about the next step. We've been living this charade for a while now, and I know it's not easy for you. It's not easy for me, either. She paused, as if searching for the right words. We agreed on this arrangement, but now I'm starting to wonder if it's enough. Mark looked at her, unsure of what she meant. He had always kept his emotions in check, but hearing her voice crack with uncertainty made something stir inside of him. Could it be that she was feeling the same way he was? That the lines between business and real emotion were blurring for her too? Eleanor, He started, his words trailing off. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. This wasn't supposed to be about feelings. We were just supposed to survive, right? But now, I don't know what to do with all this. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Mark saw a glimpse of the woman behind the cold exterior. The woman who, despite everything, had agreed to marry him for reasons he still didn't fully understand. She wasn't just a businesswoman anymore, she was someone who had been hurt, someone who had been looking for something more, even if she hadn't realized it until now. I never thought I would say this, but I don't think I can keep living like this, she confessed quietly. I wanted a solution, something that would fix my problems. But I never expected it to be this. I never expected to feel like this with you. Mark was stunned. He had never expected this level of vulnerability from her. Eleanor was a woman used to controlling every aspect of her life, and to hear her admit that this arrangement wasn't working for her was a revelation. He didn't know what to say, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't the only one caught up in the complexity of their situation. Eleanor, I feel the same way, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. This wasn't supposed to be real, but somewhere along the way, it became something more. I can't keep pretending either. He paused, his heart racing as he looked at her. I didn't sign up for this, but now that it's happening, I don't know how to stop it. Eleanor sat in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. The tension between them was palpable, but there was also a sense of clarity. They both understood now that the lines they had drawn between business and personal had become too blurred to ignore. I don't know what happens next, Mark, she whispered. I don't know if we can go back to how things were. I don't know if we can keep up this charade. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. But maybe we don't have to. Her voice cracked slightly. Maybe we can try to make this real. Mark felt a rush of emotion flood through him. For the first time, it wasn't about the money or the status. It wasn't about the contract. It was about what was happening between them. A connection. A bond. Something real. Maybe we can, Mark said softly, his voice barely a whisper. But we have to be honest with each other. No more pretending. If we're going to do this, we have to do it for the right reasons. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. They had crossed a line. They were no longer just business partners. They were something more. For the first time since they had started this arrangement, Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. We'll figure it out, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of hope. Together. And in that moment, Mark knew that everything had changed. The contract, the arrangement, it all seemed so insignificant now. What mattered was the connection they had found in each other. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid of what the future held. Let's see where this new path takes them. The days following their conversation were filled with a new kind of energy. Mark and Eleanor began to navigate their relationship with a new understanding, no longer bound by the constraints of a business arrangement. They were no longer just husband and wife on paper, they were learning to be something more. The transition wasn't easy, but it felt like a necessary step. Eleanor, who had once seemed so untouchable, began to reveal more of herself to Mark. Her usual cool demeanor was still present, but it was now paired with moments of vulnerability that she had never allowed herself to show before. They began spending more time together, not just at public events but in private as well. They would share quiet dinners, moments of conversation where the world around them seemed to disappear. Eleanor had always been guarded, but she started to open up to him about her past, about her fears, and the reasons she had built such a formidable wall around herself. Mark listened intently, realizing how much he still didn't know about her life, about the woman who had married him for convenience. And in turn, he found himself sharing more than he ever had with anyone else: his hopes, his struggles, and the deep sense of responsibility he felt for his family. One evening, as they sat in the grand library of their mansion, Mark looked up from the book he had been reading, his thoughts drifting. Eleanor was across from him, reading over some documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence between them was comfortable, but something was different now. He could sense the change. The tension between them had shifted from unease to something softer, more familiar. "Eleanor," Mark said softly, breaking the silence. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking about what we said the other night. About making this real." He paused, unsure of how to continue. He had never been good at expressing his emotions, especially when it came to matters of the heart. "I just want to make sure that we're both in this for the right reasons. I don't want to keep pretending. I want to know if this is real for you too." Eleanor put down her papers and leaned back in her chair, her gaze softening. There was a moment of stillness before she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "It is real for me, Mark," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I never imagined that I would be in a situation like this. I never imagined that I would be falling for someone like you." She sighed, as if the weight of her words was finally sinking in. "This wasn't supposed to be part of the plan, but somehow, here we are. And I can't deny what I'm feeling anymore." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had been afraid to ask the question, afraid of hearing something he didn't want to hear. But now that she had said it, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time since they had entered this arrangement, he felt like they were on the same page, like they were truly beginning to connect in a way they hadn't before. "I'm glad to hear you say that," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been feeling the same way. And I think we need to stop pretending that this is just a business deal. I want to see where this goes. I want to give us a real chance, Eleanor." There was a long pause, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Eleanor's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "I'm willing to take that chance too," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But we have to be honest with each other. No more playing roles. No more hiding behind the contract. We have to be real with each other, Mark." Mark nodded, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite put into words. He had come into this arrangement thinking that it was just about survival, about doing what was necessary to help his family, but now, he was beginning to see that it was so much more than that. It was about building a future with someone who, despite all their differences, had become a part of his life in a way he never expected. As the evening wore on, they sat together in silence, the weight of the conversation still lingering in the air. For the first time, Mark felt like they were no longer just playing a part. They were building something real, something that could stand on its own. And even though there were still many questions and uncertainties ahead, Mark knew that this was the beginning of something new. The journey they had started together was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time, they were facing them together, side by side, no longer hiding behind a contract or a facade. They were starting to build a life based on something deeper. And in that moment, Mark realized that, no matter what the future held, he wasn't alone anymore. Let's see where this new chapter takes them. The days that followed their conversation were filled with a new sense of uncertainty and excitement. Mark and Eleanor were no longer just playing a role, they were exploring something real, something they hadn't expected when they first entered this arrangement. But despite their growing connection, a shadow of doubt still lingered in the back of Mark's mind. Was this truly something that could last, or was he just getting swept up in the moment? He knew that Eleanor was still holding back in some ways, still keeping parts of herself closed off. He wasn't sure if she was fully ready to let him in, but he couldn't help but feel that they were slowly starting to build something solid. One evening, they attended a business dinner with some high-profile clients. The event was filled with laughter, light conversation, and the clinking of glasses as guests mingled around the large banquet table. As usual, Eleanor was the center of attention, effortlessly charming everyone in the room with her wit and poise. Mark, on the other hand, felt like an outsider, the constant reminder of their contractual relationship hanging over him like a cloud. They were seated next to each other, but the distance between them felt more pronounced than ever. Eleanor was deep in conversation with the client beside her, her laughter ringing out across the room. Mark, feeling suddenly disconnected, pushed his food around on his plate, not really tasting it. He had grown accustomed to being in the background, but tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the evening wore on, he excused himself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone to gather his thoughts. The cool air in the hallway felt like a welcome relief from the stuffiness of the event. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He couldn't deny the confusion that had settled in his chest. Everything between him and Eleanor was changing, but it was happening so quickly. He wasn't sure where this was going, and that uncertainty was starting to gnaw at him. When he returned to the table, Eleanor was no longer talking to the client. She was sitting quietly, her gaze fixed on her phone. As he approached, she looked up at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. Mark could see the faintest flicker of something in her eyes, a flash of vulnerability that she quickly masked. "You okay?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer than usual. Mark hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, just needed a breather," he replied with a half-smile. He didn't want to admit that he was struggling with everything happening between them, but he couldn't keep the truth bottled up forever. There was a long pause before Eleanor spoke again, her voice quiet but sincere. "Mark, I know this isn't easy. I know you've been trying to figure out what this is between us. But I need you to understand that it's not just a business deal anymore. It never really was. I care about you." The words hit Mark like a wave, leaving him momentarily speechless. He had always known that Eleanor was a woman of few words, but hearing her admit her feelings, even in such a small way, made his heart race. "Eleanor," he started, but his words trailed off as he searched for the right response. What did this mean? Was it really the beginning of something real, or was he just fooling himself? "I'm not saying this is perfect, Mark," Eleanor continued, her gaze never leaving his. "I don't know where this is going, and I can't promise everything will be easy. But I need you to know that I'm here with you, and that means something to me." Mark felt his heart swell with emotion. He had never expected to be in this situation, to feel this connected to someone like Eleanor. Despite the messiness of their relationship, there was a raw honesty between them now, something that went beyond the contract they had signed. This wasn't just a business arrangement, Anna Marie, it was something real. And he couldn't deny it any longer. "I'm here too," Mark said, his voice filled with conviction. "I don't know what's ahead, but I want to figure it out with you." Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile that spoke of trust, of hope, and of something deeper than either of them had been willing to admit. For the first time, Mark felt like they were truly in this together. As the night went on, the weight of their conversation lingered, but it was no longer the heavy burden it once had been. They were no longer pretending. They were no longer just playing roles. They were starting to build something that was truly theirs, something they both wanted to fight for. But even as they sat together, side by side, there was still a lingering question that neither of them could fully answer: what came next? Where did this path lead? Let's see how this story unfolds. The weeks that followed felt like a turning point for both Mark and Eleanor. They had started to build something real between them, but with each passing day, the reality of their situation began to set in. Their marriage was still a business arrangement in the eyes of the world, and there was always the question of how long they could keep up the charade. But something was shifting. Mark could feel it in the way Eleanor looked at him now, with a tenderness that was rare for her. She was still guarded, but there was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability that had started to take root. One evening, they attended a gala lavish event that had been planned for months. The room was filled with high-profile guests, the air buzzing with excitement. Mark stood beside Eleanor, his hand resting gently on the small of her back as they made their way through the crowd. He could feel the weight of the cameras on them, the eyes of the room following their every move. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel out of place. He wasn't just playing a role anymore, he was starting to believe in the connection they shared, even if he couldn't fully explain it. Eleanor, as usual, was the center of attention. Her grace and poise captivated the room, but Mark couldn't help but notice the way she occasionally glanced at him, as if searching for something in his eyes. He could feel the unspoken bond between them, something more than just an obligation. She was still the powerful woman he had met months ago, but now, there was a new layer to her. She had allowed herself to open up, to let him in, even if only a little. As the evening wore on, they were called to the stage to make a speech. Mark's heart raced as he walked beside Eleanor, the spotlight now fully on them. He had never been one for public speaking, and the idea of addressing a room full of influential people made his palms sweat. But Eleanor stood by his side, her presence a calming force. She took his hand as they approached the microphone, giving him a reassuring smile. In that moment, Mark realized just how far they had come. "Good evening," Eleanor began, her voice steady and commanding, as always. "We are honored to be here tonight, supporting a cause that is close to our hearts. It is a privilege to stand before you and know that together, we can make a difference." She paused for a moment, looking out at the crowd. Mark stood beside her, his heart pounding as he waited for his turn. When she turned to him, Mark stepped forward, his voice a little shaky at first, but gaining confidence as he spoke. "Thank you for being here tonight. I'm proud to stand by Eleanor's side, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to something that matters. It's been a journey, and I've learned more than I ever expected." He glanced at Eleanor, catching her eye for a brief moment before turning back to the audience. "This is just the beginning," he said with a smile, his voice steady now. "Together, we can do so much more." The applause that followed felt genuine, and for the first time, Mark didn't feel like an imposter. He wasn't just playing a role. He was part of something important, something real. He looked over at Eleanor, who was watching him with a soft smile on her lips. There was no pretense between them in that moment, no distance. They were simply two people standing side by side, sharing a moment of truth. Later that evening, as they walked back to the car, Eleanor turned to him, her expression more relaxed than it had been all night. "You did well," she said, her voice warm. "I'm proud of you." Mark smiled, his heart light. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you." Eleanor's smile softened, and for a moment, the weight of their arranged marriage seemed to disappear. In its place was something new, something they were both beginning to acknowledge. It wasn't just a contract anymore. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a partnership, a real connection that was growing deeper with each passing day. As they climbed into the car and drove away from the gala, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was starting to believe that together, they could face whatever came next. And that, for him, was enough. Let's see what happens next. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to evolve. What had started as a business arrangement, a way to solve their problems, had transformed into something neither of them had expected. There were still moments of doubt, moments when they both wondered if they had made the right decision. But those moments were becoming fewer, and the connection between them was growing stronger with every passing day. The walls that had once separated them were starting to come down, and in their place was something real, something they could both hold on to. One evening, after a long day of meetings and events, they found themselves back at the mansion, alone in the quiet of the living room. Mark was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book, when Eleanor entered, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable, before walking over and sitting next to him. For the first time in a while, there was no tension between them. No barriers. Just the two of them, sitting together in silence. "Mark," Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. For both of us. But I want you to know. I'm glad we did this. She paused, as if searching for the right words. I never expected to feel like this, but I can't deny it anymore. What we have, it's real, and I want to keep building on that. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion, something she rarely showed. Mark looked at her, his heart swelling with affection. He had never imagined that this marriage would turn into something so important, so meaningful. He had come into this thinking it was just a way to survive, but now, it was so much more. I feel the same way, he said quietly. I never thought we'd get here, but now that we are, I want to keep going too. He reached out and took her hand, the simple touch speaking volumes. Eleanor smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile Mark had come to cherish, a smile that told him everything he needed to know. We've come a long way, she said, her voice filled with warmth. And I think this is just the beginning. She leaned in slightly, her lips brushing against his in a tender kiss that sealed their unspoken promise to each other. In that moment, Mark realized how far they had both come. What had started as a contract, a way to get through the tough times, had become something beautiful. They were no longer just living out a role for the world to see, they were truly building a life together, one step at a time. It wasn't perfect, and they knew there would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. As the evening wore on, they sat together, talking about their hopes for the future. They talked about everything from their careers to their dreams, to the life they wanted to build. It was a conversation they had never had before, one that felt both new and comfortable at the same time. They were no longer just playing a part. They were truly partners, and they were ready to face whatever came next. Mark knew that life wasn't always going to be easy, but with Eleanor by his side, he was ready for whatever came their way. Together, they could face anything. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. As they stood together, looking out at the city lights through the window, Mark realized that everything had changed. What had begun as a simple agreement had blossomed into something real, something he couldn't have imagined. But now, it was his reality. And it was a reality he was ready to embrace. Let's see where this journey takes them.